Before we get started on the next section, I did squeeze in this slide. So as I said, Todd Whitney and Terry Scott presented yesterday for us at our New Educator Institute. And this is a slide that I think people should be aware of. So this was in common areas when Terry and his team did observations. But the average elementary student hears something positive from adult every 5.8 minutes. For middle school, it's 2.5 minutes and 4.3 minutes for high school. So middle school is the lowest, which I think is super interesting. I actually think that once every 5.8 minutes is pretty good for a positive. But then when you come down here and see the negatives, I think this is the interesting part. In contrast, negatives are heard every 1.8 minutes at the elementary, 1.6 minutes at middle school, and every 23 seconds at the high school level. So the amount of negatives compared to positives are drastically different. And we want actually it to be flipped. We want much more positive than negative feedback to be given. So just a slide that I found interesting, popped in because feedback is so important, but we want it to be meaningful, timely, and positive. All right, so the next slide, most of you already filled out on the Mentimeter, but it talks about your programming. So if you haven't filled that in, go ahead and fill that in now. Okay, you were able to select more than one, obviously. So in what settings do you typically provide services for students with disabilities? And again, we're offering a continuum, as we should. So we are offering services across the board. So when we're looking at alternative placement, we're at 11%, self-contained 13%, resource room 22%, general ed setting push-in 23%, now 24%, now 25%. And general education setting co-teaching is at 18%, and more of a consultative service at 11%. And that's what we would expect. Based on the LRE information that was provided to you earlier, we have more kids being served in general education, which is obviously what we want. The alternative placement, we want that to be as low as possible. We want more students to provide access within their home schools and to be receiving services within their home schools in order to be successful. But when we're looking here and we're talking about the mindset shift of earlier, and we're talking about we need to provide placement that supports our students, but when we're also looking at the setting in which we're providing those services, the more conducive the setting is to learning, and if we remove those barriers within the context, then students are able to be more successful. So that's what we want to get back to. So again, here's our continuum of services, but the goal is to make general education more conducive to all learning so that more students can be successful in that setting. So here's my question to you. We have that continuum. When we're looking at the continuum and we're looking at all those placement options that you had selected, have we really evolved over time? Okay, we have yes.
They're in the same building, and in most cases, all students are in the same classroom except for obviously.
Okay.
So that's huge from a time where you can hear special ed students or teachers talk about the time where if they were in the gen ed building, they were in the basement behind the boiler room.
Absolutely.
Right? So we've moved way beyond that.
Yeah. So just presence and being in the building, we have evolved significantly, right? Now they're educated alongside their peers within the classroom. Think about the specific settings that we talked about earlier, that even though they're in the classroom, if they're pulled back, we're reverting back on this model a little bit more. So think about what it looks like. Are they just there, or do they have meaningful access to the curriculum? And that's what we want to push for. So we're going to rethink our current programming. And really, the book Reimagining Special Education by Jenna Rufo is one that is a great resource for you. It's in the Padlet. And then you also have Leading for All as well, and that's the one that you're taking with you for your team to share, but this information really came from there. We want to make sure that all educators have this training, which is what we spent all morning talking about. It's what the teachers do. We talked about a strong Tier 1 and how we can't intervene and support our way out of Tier 1 instruction that isn't good. So we need to make sure we have strong Tier 1. And we want to utilize universal design for learning. How are we designing the instruction to meet the needs of all learners? If our design fails, we need to differentiate, and we need to make sure that we're meeting the learning of students that way. How many of you are already familiar with UDL and differentiation? All of those terms, right? So I could not find the research base, but can I call you out for a moment? So apparently Hattie has a new number one, so you'll have to send me the link.
Yes.
And instead of collective teacher efficacy, UDL is the new number one at 2.8. We have some nods over here as well. So making sure that our teachers understand the pillars of universal design for learning. We are engaging our students. We're talking about how teachers are teaching or representing the content, and we're talking about how students are showing what they know, and how are we providing different access points and all of that through universal design for learning. We are going to prioritize key content. I'm sure several of you have prioritized standards that say these are the most important standards that we have to teach and spend time on, that students have to master, and we embed the other standards within those. Because there's so many, and we only have this amount of time. So we have to prioritize the content that we're teaching. And we have to help both special ed teachers and general education teachers understand what specially designed instruction is and how to provide that. Again, it is an hours mentality. It's not just the special ed teacher's job to provide that specially designed instruction. If I see you for 30 minutes a day and I'm providing that intense specially designed instruction during your resource room time, or if you're in the general education classroom and I'm pushing in for 30 minutes a day, I need someone to do that when I'm not there. I need that general education teacher to understand, how do I provide this instruction to meet the needs of the student? Again, that collaboration that we were talking about earlier. So, just some starting to think about. All students should attend neighborhood schools. These are the big picture thinking. Specialized programs of, I have a program just for students with more significant cognitive disabilities at this building within my classroom. Again, new thinking, but we're trying to move away from that. We want our students to be able to go outside in their neighborhood and see somebody from their class right next door. So think about that when you're talking about programming. All students are general education students first, and they're assigned to a homeroom. That's one way to show that sense of belonging. It is not a special ed teacher student and a gen ed teacher student. It is the entire school. Everyone is assigned a general education teacher. Even if they're not able to be in there for the entire day. Even if they just start there and they end there. Or they're there for lunch. Whatever that might look like depends on that student's needs. But they're all assigned to a teacher. And we have flexible and fluid service delivery models throughout. Sometimes when we have students with more significant cognitive disabilities in a self-contained classroom, it starts out that way in preschool, continues in kindergarten, and when we look at the track, students are still in a self-contained setting in high school. So because you were placed there initially, you never even got the opportunity to be in a different placement. So one of the things that I think is interesting, to look at some of your populations of students and see, have students moved out of programming to a lesser restrictive environment? And if so, were they successful? Or if you've had students from kindergarten to 5th grade at the elementary level, have they always been in the same program because it's what we've always done? Have we tried to look at something different or try something new for students? So making sure that our service delivery models meet the needs of students, and as they can be more successful in general education, we place them in lesser restrictive environments. And intentional supports, not just for students with disabilities, but for everybody. We talked about equity earlier. What kids need, when they need it. I don't have to provide these supports and interventions all the time, but if fractions is really hard, I'm definitely going to provide them during the fractions unit. But if they're successful in a geometry unit because they know their shapes and they're able to be successful, then I don't need as much support. I can back off a little bit during that time. Within Leading for All, it has leadership moves, an entire chapter on leadership moves to rethink programming. So it talks about communicating amongst staff. Part of that is knowing where your staff's skills are and how you can support them. It talks about communicating with other stakeholders across the community. The role that administrators have, so we talked about climate, culture, beliefs this morning. You have to convey that vision for your school. You have to put forth, this is what inclusion is. Oftentimes we have many different definitions for the same words in education. But for Noblesville schools, this is what inclusion is and this is what it looks like and here are belief statements surrounding it. You're articulating that. We are talking at this table even down to the hiring processes, which I know right now it's hard for me to even say this because there's not enough teachers to go around. But are you hiring people that are coming to you with these beliefs in place? Professional development. One of the chapters I think is really interesting about facilities and operations is, are we inclusive in the way that our facilities are set up? So the example in the book is really all about, of course we're ADA compliant. Our schools are ADA compliant. But a student who was in a wheelchair wanted to sit in the student section with her peers. She was unable to do that with the facilities that were noted. So down to the facilities, they were able to carve out a section where a wheelchair accessible ramp was put in so that she could be in the student section with peers. So that right there is creating that community of inclusion and allowing this student to have a sense of belonging. But it took her stepping up to say something. So thinking about even the facilities and operations that are taking place in your building. Do you have a special education hallway or wing? This is where the resource rooms are. Or are they integrated amongst the building? Labeling is everything. Special education hallway or resource room is probably not what you want to put on the outside of your buildings. These might be support centers for all students or something like that, but think about our language within our buildings as well. How are we allocating resources? When we talk about special education funding, we talk about title funding, we talk about all these funding streams, and sometimes we buy materials just for these specific programs. But again, we're creating this sense of shared responsibility, and resources reflect that as well. So roles of teachers might have to change. The way you write a job description for a special education teacher may look different than what it has in the past, because you're creating that sense of shared responsibility. Gen Ed teachers' job descriptions may look a little bit different. How are we utilizing resources to best support the needs of our learners? So thinking about that. Roles and the contracts, I just talked about that, but even down to the contract level, when we're talking about our teachers and integrating some of that inclusive language within our contracts and contract negotiations. And I know that's district level and beyond, and it takes a lot, especially with unions and those types of things, but we have to start somewhere. So having the conversation about what's embedded in our contracts and how does it reflect that roles shift and change based off of the needs of students. And we're going to put you in the role that we need you to be in to support our learners. Stakeholder input is important, and then creating partnerships along the way is also important. So these are some of those leadership moves that you can pull from and really consider, what does our current programming look like and how can we change, whether it's on a small level, small baby steps, or whether you're going to take on something much larger in order to improve the inclusive practices in your district. So we talked about what's the next evolution, and you said shapes earlier. Does anybody have another one that they might push? Sorry, that they might push on beyond the little pieces and slices of the pie? Got it, okay. So you may have different sizes of pie slices, okay? It really comes down to valuing each member of the community, whether you have a disability or not, and creating that sense of belonging for all. So I'm going to end on this quote today by Shelley Moore, but it really is looking at inclusion as something that just is. It's just how we treat people, how we allow people to have that sense of belonging within their community. And when we know that we've truly mastered it, is when we can stop talking about it. We can stop coming together and say, let's talk about inclusion. We don't have to talk about it anymore than everybody has that sense of belonging. So that's the mastery level, which, does that ever really happen? Maybe in this utopian society, but we're not there, but our goal is to continue to work towards that. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Angie, who's going to start the problem solving side of our presentation.
Do you have inclusion rooms?
Yeah, so we use it in the context of either differentiating placement, like Huffington as a setting, self-contained as a setting,
Okay.
or, what we're talking about, LRE.
Okay, so using inclusion in the sense of placement or setting. How else do you hear the term inclusion? Go ahead.
I have seen it used in settings as a philosophy or an attempt to adopt and implement a culture of learning for students, that all students have the right to be taught in the same classroom, in the same setting as their peers.
Right, everybody has the right to belong, to be part of that setting. What we hear often, though, is as a verb, I'm going to do inclusion. I'm a teacher who does inclusion as if it's like an action, a specific thing, or a setting, the inclusion room, which by default means if you're not in the inclusion room, you're in the exclusion room, right? And we don't want that. But getting back to what Eric just said, the philosophy, the mindset, the culture of inclusion is really what we're striving for. We're looking at just belonging for everyone. Okay, so this afternoon, I hope you are all full of some kind of good food, and I will try to make this exciting, but it's not exciting. It is hard. We're going to be talking about success gaps. We're going to be talking about database problem solving, and if you haven't checked out yet, it's hard. So stick with me as best as you can, because I really feel like once we get into this content and you see how it can shift us to the outcomes that we really, really want, it's an incredibly important topic, just a little bit on the dry side. All right, I'm going to start by just letting somebody in the expert field tell you a little bit more about success gaps.
We want all the children in our communities to learn and thrive. But when we examine how specific groups of students are doing, we often discover that some groups are not doing as well as others. For example, maybe one group is not graduating at the same rate as another. Or maybe another group has lower reading scores than their peers. Or maybe yet another group is being suspended more than other groups of students. Each of these differences in educational factors and outcomes represents a success gap. If we allow these success gaps to continue over time, they tend to grow, and groups of students fall further and further behind. If it were just about academic test scores, we would call it an achievement gap. But test scores are just one part of the story. Success gaps are differences in a wide variety of educational factors and outcomes that represent educational success. When a success gap is identified by a school or district, it means that we are not meeting the needs of all groups of students well. Schools and districts must consider how they are supporting the groups of children experiencing success gaps and why those gaps are occurring. It is tempting to look at these gaps and blame the child's motivation for learning or family circumstances. But rather than thinking we need to fix our students, we can make a real difference by thinking we need to fix our systems. That means making decisions based on data, developing culturally responsive systems, promoting high-quality core instruction, providing interventions, and monitoring our progress. If success gaps are allowed to continue, they can contribute to larger social inequities that last for generations. But if we work together to address them correctly, we can achieve the promise of providing equal opportunity for all. Learn more about how you can address success gaps.
So I guess I want to start by talking about that oftentimes when we look at those success gaps, Marcy started off the day by talking about the opportunity that's out there, right? That we've got students in special ed, we have students whose native language is not English, and they have huge gaps compared to our non-disabled English-speaking students. But what we want to do is, as we go through this process this afternoon, is start to look at, let's not just start there, let's dig deeper. Let's think about what are some of the underlying causes, what are some of the data pieces that might not lead us to just saying, oh, well, special ed kids are struggling, it's obviously a special ed issue, you folks who take care of special ed, go and fix it, right? Go do something different. It's taking us deliberately through a problem-solving process to say, we need to dig into this. We need to look at the data. We need to see what things are potentially contributing to this difference. And then we need to very specifically problem-solve around what are we going to do? What actions can we take to impact these things? So as we use data to really help make these decisions, we have data that may be around who gets the data, who can pull it all together, how do we share information, things around the scheduling, right? Sometimes the schedule is like our worst enemy when it comes to supporting students. It may lead us to thinking more about what kind of coaching needs to happen to build up that skill set to make sure that we do increase that collective teacher efficacy, since we know that's so important. But lots of things around data to make sure that the data is always driving the decisions that we make. And again, we're going to look at some resources that are on your Padlet as well. So exactly what is this? Well, first and foremost, it's an evidence-based process. And it's helping us to make instructional decisions that are clearly based on the data, not just based on gut. It also helps us make decisions not just about the academic piece, but about the behavior. And it helps us to take the emotion and the vagueness out of what we do. So we want to make sure that we're not making decisions saying, I think this got better, or I think it's not really having an impact. It's not about what we think, what we feel, what we believe. It's about what is the data showing us. So always relying on that data so that we can be more objective, we can start prioritizing better and put things into very clear, concrete terms so that we know what it is that we're measuring. And then also to make sure that as we determine what actions we're going to take and what measures we're going to use, that they are lining up with what it is that we're focused on. So this gives us a 5-step problem for problem solving. And I mean, there are so many problem solving models out there, but most of them center around the same basic steps. The caveat with this one is that we have to start with building a team, right? Now, that's just kind of implied for most problem-solving processes. It's significantly important here, and so we're going to spend a little bit of time here in just a minute talking about teaming and how do you construct that team and make sure that you've got the right people at the table. And then it jumps into the typical problem-solving steps. Number one, we've got to have a clear picture of what's going on based on the data. Problem identification. And then we have to dig into that data and analyze it. So we're looking for actionable root causes. Now, we've been talking for years about root causes. Why is this happening? You know, what is causing this situation? Actionable root causes was kind of a new concept for me as we started looking at this, because it's about what things can we actually control, make an impact on, have changes that as educators we can make a dent here. So we'll talk more about that as well. And then plan development, creating that action plan that's got the level of detail that we need to make sure it's going to get done and that we don't miss key steps. And then finally, got to do it, right? Plan implementation, and then that constant evaluation, because if we're not collecting additional data and evaluating what we do, we don't know whether it's having any kind of impact or whether we're putting a whole lot of energy into nothing that's not giving us the outcomes. So have a quick discussion at your table. First, do you already have a database problem-solving kind of process of some sort? It may not look like this, but do you already have some kind of a process? And I want you to think beyond this team here, but in your other teaming structures, such as, you know, your pre-referral teams or your MTSS teams, your school improvement team, any of the teams that you have, are they using a database process? And can you put your name or your finger on what the name is? Like, do you know that's what everybody's following, or are you just hoping? Okay? So have a quick discussion about that. Okay, does anyone have a problem-solving process that they can tell me is used within a specific group or team or anything that you have at school? Give me a thumbs up if you know of a team in your school that has a clear process that's data-driven. So give me a thumbs up. A couple of thumbs. Give me 2 thumbs up if school-wide everyone can tell you about this process. That's sometimes the hitch. And people move in and out of roles on those teams, and it may be that we've suddenly got new people in and the process goes away because it's not a common type of process that we use across the board. Okay, what I would like you to do now, you all have notepads on your tables that you can use. Take one piece of paper and get a pen ready. So there are pens in the caddies. And get your brains ready, because you're going to have to focus. No, you're not going to have to grab any fidgets. Just. Okay, I am going to show you a visual. I'm going to give you 10 seconds once I pull it up on screen. And then you're going to have 45 seconds to try and copy it from memory. The exact letters in the exact places that you saw them. Are you ready? Here we go. All right, do not talk or work with anybody at your table, but you have 45 seconds to try to recreate that triangle from memory. This is the no talking part. I'd give you all 45 seconds, but I see pens have stopped. Okay, here's what I want you to do now. Check your work individually. I want you to count the numbers of letters that are correct. And in order to be correct and get a point for it, it has to be the right letter in the right spot. Okay, and then write your score down on your page. Once you have your score, get the average score for your table. So add them up and divide by the number of people who are at your table. All right, what's your average score for the table?
Probably zero.
Zero?
No, we have better than zero. I'm 7.5.
3.375.
3.83.
2? What do you got in the back here? What was it?
Why you gotta refresh? Our average
4 2/5. Yes.
is 7.
Wow. Okay, 7. We've got an anomaly here.
We have 3.8.
3.8, 5, 5.3, 7. Okay, so that's the average. Now, I want you to create a collective score. And what you can do is look across everyone and say, I had the Q right, and you had the I right. We're adding those together. So you only get to count each letter once for the group. If anyone got it right, it gets 1. So create your collective score.
You did. You got these.
I got the But you know what? Had I not had that B too. I got the F. You would have had that.
Okay, I'm going to go backwards this time. What is your collective score? No, if you have one of them and you have one of them and you have one of them, that's 3.
If we got the same 4.
If you got the same 4, there's still only 4, because you only get to count it once. So you said 13?
Well, like I got 13, and then.
But you have to look at each individual letter. Did anybody get the Y right? Okay, that only counts for 1. Did anybody get the Q right? And you count them that way. Okay, 13. What do you got?
So, I think we have 12, but I'm not sure how we're counting.
So we're doing like
If we all got the Y, we get 1 point each, or
If anyone got the Y,
oh,
it's a 1 point.
1 for each?
No, 1 point.
1 point.
You only count the Y once.
Okay. And then the Q ones of the Z?
Yes. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13, 14, 20, 22, 23, 24, 25, 27 potential points. Well, let me just ask this. Did anyone up their score as a group collective score? Okay, so just about everybody. Okay, I'm going to give you one more shot at this. Different letters, no cheating, no writing them down as you go. But this time you are going to be working as a group, as a team. So I'm going to give you 1 minute to think about a strategy for how you're going to get the best score possible. No, you're strategizing. You're going to get different letters.
Well, I thought you were trying to trick us.
Nope. Nope. I wouldn't try and trick you.
So you want me to take P alternative? Yes. WB and okay, TV.
Everyone got some sort of strategy? Okay, ready? Here we go. 10 seconds.
Wait.
Okay, work together and recreate your triangle from memory. Okay, count within your group effort, what is your score? How well did you do? Anyone get at least 18 letters?
Hold on.
Holy crap. I let us down.
And remember, everybody's count is the group collective. 23. Anybody beat 23? 24? 26? 26. Oh my gosh. You guys too? Pretty amazing.
Make 2 more people.
That's true. Now, sometimes group size does matter, right? If you have 2 people or if you have 3 people, it may be a little easier to take something up and divvy it into smaller chunks. I can handle doing a couple of steps in a plan. I can't handle doing 10 of the steps. It's too much. So having the right people, if you had all people with memory impairments, especially visual memory impairments at your table, you could have 20 and you're still going to have a hard time, right? So team membership is important. So when we're looking at continuous improvement, teaming is absolutely important. A team is defined as a group of people working interdependently. So not just that we're all in the same room forced to attend the same meeting, right? We're actually working in ways that are dependent on each other to achieve a common goal for which each member is mutually accountable. This isn't my project and I have asked you all to be part of it and to do my bidding, right? We are all on the same page and we are all accountable for the outcome and the work. Okay, so I got another short video to try and keep you awake today.
When you think about putting together your Success Gaps team, it's easy to get, employees to circle up and think about things that, they want to change or improve for students. And that's important. They have a perspective that nobody else has because they're there, in the classrooms, in the schools with the kids every day. But also including community members, families, students themselves. Having people with lived experience really gives us an opportunity to hear perspectives that we might not have heard before.
And one of the most important members of the team is the family person that's representing the group of children that are experiencing the success gap.
Because in order to find any kind of success gaps, you first have to be able to realize that there are gaps.
And those perspectives can be the difference between identifying the root cause you really need to work on and kind of staying at the surface level.
Change is hard, and there are a lot of complex issues that we're trying to address when we're looking at success gaps. I can think of a time when I was working with the district and we could identify some actionable steps related to the root cause. But when we got to those steps, the people that were in the position of authority weren't really available. And so the team just kept talking about the problems without really being able to implement those action steps in a viable way that would move us forward. So it's really important that we have the right decision makers at the table related to the work we're doing.
When those groups are all able to come together and then put those actions in place and see an impact, that's very motivating, and continue to really think about how can we all work together to improve outcomes for our students.
All right, so as you look at getting the right team together, and some of you have big teams here, some of you have little teams, some of you are here by yourselves. But we have to make sure that everything that we do is really within that team setting. Otherwise, we could disappear, right? Something could happen and I could not be at this job tomorrow, but if I was acting alone and really didn't have that team structure, then the work kind of dies off, right? The work goes away when I go away. So as we start looking for the team, we need to make sure that we've got people on the same page as far as the mission and the goal of what the work is for the team. So making sure that everyone is dedicated to making change. If we're just serving our time because I've got to sit on 3 committees or, do the kind of obligatory things at school, that's different than having people who are at the table who are committed to trying to make equitable practices available so that we have all students making improvement. We also have to make sure that there's some authority at the table. So I know she mentioned on the video that sometimes there are changes that need to happen. We start to make those changes and then we hit the wall of there's nobody here who can make that happen. There's nobody here who can make that final decision. So having that right level of expertise at the table and the authority piece. Making sure that it is a welcoming environment. That when we bring somebody onto the team, they can feel like part of the team, not I'm the newbie and so I don't get a voice here. That it truly is a welcoming, open kind of environment. Also, being very clear about what are the expectations. If I join this team, how much of a commitment, how much time, how much responsibility is it going to be? I've gotten suckered into a lot of things over the years that I had no idea what I was taking on until I had said yes. And then went, oh my gosh, what have I committed to? And I think that's just a transparent way to approach, here's what we're going to expect, but here's what we can get out of it too. We need to make sure and establish roles and responsibility. Use that data to try and be objective and really push for our team members to be objective and to rely on the data and not just go with their own opinions about things. And then we use things like meeting norms, having some ground rules at our meetings to help make sure that we're making the best use of our time and committing to using, I know you can't see that on there, but committing to using the problem-solving process. Sometimes we just want to shortcut things because we're running out of time. So making sure that we all come into this knowing we are going to be following the database problem-solving process to really try and affect change. So we need to think about your individual teams And you may not be, if you're not here with a bigger team, you may not be able to completely problem solve this. But we want to think about things like, what is the skill capacity within the teams that you have? Do we have the right people with the right knowledge able to look at the data, right? If I don't have somebody who truly understands data, I need somebody who can truly understand data. What's the interpretation capacity? We can admire data and we can admire problems all day long and not know where to go next, not know what certain things mean. And again, if we are processing, something that is mainly an English language arts issue, but I don't have anybody who truly understands that content at the table, then we're going to be missing something when we start to think about some of the actions that need to happen. So skills, data understanding, all of that kind of stuff. You can look at within this book, you can look at how to take an inventory of your current team capacity too. So you can kind of go through the steps of this to figure out, who do we need? What kind of skills do we need? What resources do we need to have in order for this team to function? All of those kinds of things. And again, you've got links on the Padlet to some of this information. So here's what I want you to do. Again, a couple minutes at your table. Number one, ask yourselves, are we the team? Do we have a team? Maybe some of them are part of a team, but they're not here today, and that's okay too. Are we the right people? Who are we missing? Not a who like Bob, right? But who meaning I need a data person, I need a content person, I need an elementary person, and we don't have anybody representing that voice if we're problem solving at a district kind of level. So who are we missing here, and how are we going to get to the team that we want from the team that we have? So discuss this with your group. All right, is anybody fully satisfied that they have got the team? You've got like the frontline team. We don't need anybody else. We're good to go. Anyone? Okay, that's amazing. Any particular roles that any of you thought of that we're missing this? We're missing authority, we're missing content, we're missing data interpretation. So hitting the data, making sure we've got a good data person, hitting some other content areas, other buildings that maybe aren't represented within our team that need to have a voice as well. Right? If we're most concerned about our EL population, we want somebody to represent EL. Anyone have involvement in their team from other stakeholders like parents or students? That's often missing from a team. And that does not come without its challenges. When you bring people into your team that are not used to being part of this kind of team, it's difficult, but it can be very, very valuable as well. All right, so step one is creating an appropriate team. Step two is problem identification. And within problem identification, again, we use problem solving all the time. This specifically is looking at our data to be able to determine what those success gaps are. Okay, so the purpose is to figure out where are we going to problem solve. We could problem solve around all sorts of issues. I mean, if we start listing the woes of what we face in education, the list gets pretty long. We've got a lot of things that we're concerned about. But the point is to take all that data and say, but where are we going to put the effort? Where do we think is the most important place to start the work? And then to verify that that is really what it is, right? We have to make sure that we are on the right right pathway. So the outcome here in this step of the problem-solving process is to have a measurable and objective statement of exactly what that problem is in the form of what we're calling a success gap statement. So we're starting from the big picture, the overall outcome, and what we want to do is take all our data along the way to get to a more narrow success gap statement. So you may start by thinking our special ed population is struggling, right? We want our special ed students to improve their overall abilities or their overall academic achievement or their overall behavior, whatever it is that we're struggling with. But as we start to focus that down, where is the point that we need to put the most effort? Is it certain grade levels? Is it factions within that group? Are we looking at language arts? Are we looking at math? Are we looking at both? Where are we going to put the effort? If we start shooting at this big overall broad goal of what we want, then we're hitting all over the place. If we can focus that down, then our efforts, hopefully we will see some actual outcomes. So as I really struggle with this sometimes. As a psychologist, when I go into meetings with teachers, when I go into MTSS meetings, I'm a problem solver, and I think that's what a lot of us are. Somebody starts with, I've got this issue, well, let me help you, right? You could do A, you could do B, you could do C. I jump right into giving you options, giving you possible interventions, possible actions that you can take without that first prioritizing and figuring out what do we want to work on, and does the data support that that's what we really need to be working on. So here are some general guiding questions. What is our overall goal? What are we looking at? We've got to know what we're shooting for in order to have a good starting place. And then let's start digging into that data. What exactly is the current state of what's going on with students? And we need to look overall, we need to disaggregate, we need to break it down in different skills, any of the data that we have access to. And then what's the gap? If I want you here and you're here, that's a little bit of a gap, right? But if I want you here and you're here, that becomes a priority problem. This is a big, big issue. Look around to other schools, not just other schools near you. Sometimes that can be a helpful comparison, but if you also look within the information that the Department of Education gives you about some comparison schools across the state that might be very similar to your school, your district, based on size, based on population, that can be a good help too to have a comparison there. So how are other places performing? What are some of the trends? Have we gone down over the years? Are we already making some progress and we want to capitalize on that progress? And again, what is the priority in order for us to then develop that success gap statement? We need all of this data along the way in order to get to that statement. And when John starts talking about problem analysis here in just a few minutes, he's going to have some good examples of exactly what does that success gap statement look like. What are we talking about in those statements? So again, we may start with, we're struggling with our special ed population. They are not performing where we want them to perform. But then when we start asking some questions on exactly what is happening, why is it happening, when is it happening, it's kind of like doing a functional behavioral assessment, right? We're looking at who is this happening with, what might be contributing to it, how big is the issue, how do you know this is an issue? Sometimes we think we have issues that as we start looking at the data, it's not really an issue, right? We're looking at the wrong thing. And just an example, we go into a lot of school districts that may be out of compliance for one thing or another, and almost inevitably, I hear this almost everywhere I go, it's one of two things. Poverty, right? You hear a lot, everywhere I go, it's, well, you know, let me tell you about our free and reduced lunch rate. Like, yep, and everywhere else too. Everywhere I go, that's the same, we have the same issues. Or I hear it's the move-in students. Let me tell you, the move-in students come in, their LRE is so restrictive already, it's this, it's that, it's the other. We had a district working on LRE that over and over again, we know what the problem is. We know exactly what the problem is. It's our move-in students. And so they started to problem solve around, what are we going to do with these move-in students? How are we going to fix this issue? Until we started looking at the data. And as they dug into the data, the problem really rested within the students who had been in the district for years, not with the move-in students. It sometimes feels like certain things are evident, but when you look at the data, it could confirm that, but many times it will tell you you were on the wrong path. So it's really important for us to dig into that. So as we start to clearly define those issues and make them more specific, then we're not jumping into problem solving already. Because if we try to address a potential cause for something that wasn't really the cause, again, we're putting a whole lot of time and a whole lot of effort into something that is not going to have the outcome that we're looking for.
Marcy shared with us that collective teacher efficacy has an effect size of 1.57 and a direct correlation to student achievement. But it's only when we know what teachers need that we can provide what they need. Only when we know what they need can we provide what they need. And isn't that where it happens? In the classroom. It happens in that first grade reading class. It happens in that middle school algebra class. Rick DeFore, you've seen his name up here before. I don't know if you know of Rick, but pioneered professional learning communities at his high school in Illinois back in the 90s. And he said, and this is really where we should be. When professionals know better, they have the obligation to do better. And this begins with a systematic analysis of where we are, clarity on where we want to be, and a commitment to get there. Honest, systematic assessment of where we are. Looking in the mirror at things we may not be comfortable seeing, but being honest about what we see. And using actionable data at that point. And let me speak to data for a minute. You've heard it many times today. Data can get in our way. If data is not meaningful, accessible, actionable, it doesn't belong. And as leaders, it's our responsibility. As a leadership team, we are keepers of the vision. We talked, the second point was where we want to be. We are keepers of that vision as leaders, as leadership teams. But to know where we are, we have to use actionable data. The difference between where we are and where we want to be, you've heard it many times, we call those gaps. Success gaps. And I'm putting a plural, I'm putting an S on that because we talked about a gap, but it's gaps. Success gaps. And more importantly than success gaps, it's the causes of those gaps. April 12, 1914, between 11:30 and 11:45, First Officer Murdoch in the crow's nest above the RMS Titanic sees an iceberg. He immediately alerts the bridge. The bridge takes evasive action, puts the engines in full reverse, avoids direct impact, and glances the side of this iceberg. And reports afterwards from workers said, chunks of ice fell on the deck, nobody was hurt, we were relieved we had missed the iceberg. Of course, 2 hours, 40 minutes later, the second half of the Titanic was on its way to the bottom. They saw the problem. We see the gap. We know what the problem is. What they didn't see 10 feet below the waterline was the part of the iceberg that would cause a 300-foot gash that sunk the entire ship. These are the root causes down here. So it's our obligation when we take a systematic look at where we are, we have to look well below this. Certainly we have to acknowledge the success gaps. I mean, those are pretty apparent to us. But if we don't understand what's below, what the causes are, the problem will not go away. Think of a weed. Another analogy would be a weed, prevalent in my yard. If I don't get the root of that weed, it will reappear. It may look good for a little bit because I pulled it up, the dandelion, but the root will be there. Let me ask you for a minute to reflect on your iceberg. What are your icebergs? Those gaps. Go ahead and talk. For good conversations. Just in the brief time you had, I heard conversations on rigor. I heard conversations on communication. Let's look below the iceberg now. Let's look at root causes. A root cause, as you probably know, is that fundamental reason why a problem's occurring. And I will put an S on this and say there are fundamental reasons why problems occur, why the gaps occur. These can be changed if they are true root causes. They are called actionable root causes. We can change these. Certain things we cannot change. Federal mandates we cannot change. We'd like to, but we cannot change. When we say students are moving in, moving out of the district, we really can't change that. Actionable root causes we can affect, and these root causes are actionable when we can do something to them to change them. We can add, take away, we can begin, we can stop doing something, modify those, impact those root causes so that what is happening that's undesirable ceases to happen, or what is not happening that is desirable happens. That's an actionable root cause. And it begins with, you can double check that with an if-then statement, and I'll show you an example in a minute. But another example. If we increase collaboration time for math teachers, then coordinated instruction and assessment will occur. If we do this, then that will happen. If I attack this root cause, then this gap will cease to be. Now, if you look at this, what are some issues with this? What are some issues with that? Oh, come on.
It makes some assumptions about the quality of the math instruction and the quality of the instruction collaboration that aren't necessarily apparent or true.
Yeah. So there would be action steps or qualifications on What does a structured collaboration look like? Will they analyze common formative assessments, and when they analyze those common formative assessments, what should the outcomes be? So there has to be clarity with that. In a system like a school, or any system, GM, the airline industry, when they do NTSB does a crash analysis, there's rarely a root cause. There are root causes, and that speaks to collaboration, and instruction, and the way we assess or analyze our data. Let's go the right direction. Have you seen the 5 whys? Most of you have, right? 5 whys, that process. If you want to get to the root cause, all right, want to get to the root cause, you act like a 2-year-old. Why? Why? I remember my son doing that. It's like, why? Because I told you. That's why. Because your mom told me to tell you why. So you come up with the problem. Then you ask why. And you come up with all the possible first-line reasons. We're going to show you an example of this in a minute. And then, okay, well, why is that? Well, could be this, could be this, could be this. Why is that? Could be this, could be that. Let's look at an example. One that I'm familiar with all too well. Speeding tickets. That's the problem. Got a speeding ticket. Why? I was late for work. Man, why else? Anything else? I didn't see the police. Isn't that what we always do? As long as we don't see the police, we're not speeding. I didn't know the speed limit. Okay, let's follow one of those. Was late for work. Why? Shift starts too early. Why is that X'd out, by the way? Nothing we can control. Didn't hear the alarm. Why didn't you hear the alarm? Didn't set the alarm. Why? Well, I was too tired last night. Why? Because I stayed up too late. Why else were you late for? Well, I overslept. Why? Well, I didn't hear the alarm and I was too tired to wake up. Why? I stayed up too late last night. I didn't see the police. I wasn't paying attention, and not paying attention because I was running late goes back to stayed up too late. And what you can see on this is that you drill down until you get something that if I take care of this, then this should not happen. Or at least for that reason. If, then. I ask you to identify an iceberg. Big old iceberg, big gap in your system. At your table, using that iceberg, what are some reasons? And you can use this 5 why. Generate a list of why your iceberg is occurring. Generate those reasons and come up with an actionable cause, at least for now. Go. What was your iceberg, by the way? Or icebergs? Talk to some of you about your icebergs. Anybody come up with a root cause? By the way, it takes time to do this. I didn't give you nearly enough time to do a true root cause analysis using 5 whys. Let me hear about a root cause. Share with us a root cause, if you would. Yes?
Our iceberg was inclusion and where we feel like it's...
Inclusion, iceberg?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And so why isn't inclusion happening in our district or whatever to the level that we'd like to see it? We said communication, lack of PD, the mindset of some of our staff, and maybe resources. And then we did the why, all of those. Why on the communication? Probably because they're not meeting together, you know, whether it's Fed and Gen Ed or whatever. That goes down to even our paraprofessionals, things like that.
Interesting. Yes. Yep.
As far as that goes, and why don't those happen? And probably leadership or structure of time, schedule, that type of thing. So we kind of left that under leadership, and then Inclusion doesn't happen maybe because of lack of PD, why we can't find subs, or why
Okay.
schedules, things like that. We left that open there. Inclusion doesn't happen because of maybe the mindset of some of our faculty. And why is that? Because they think it's their problem, right? So the kids still get shoved out or whatever. Why is that? Probably because of lack of PD. Inclusion doesn't happen because of resources. What about resources? Well, if I'm a 7th grade math teacher and this kid is sitting in my room, I'm supposed to teach them 7th grade math, but they're at a 4th grade level and I don't have 4th grade resources. How am I supposed to do that? You know, that type of thing. So grade level. So is that a funding thing or is it a lack of PD? So we tied everything, we felt like, back to a root cause is probably lack of focus and professional development.
Lack of focus in PD?
Yeah.
That's a good example. That's a great example of a 5 why, actually in a very short period of time. Good job.
Thank you.
We start with a student problem. Students are not succeeding. Whoa. Remember the slide we saw on success gaps, or the video? It's not about fixing the child, it's about fixing the system. Fixing the system. By the way, with the Titanic, there were a lot of things they could change. You know, the guy that was supposed to be in the crow's nest was reassigned to another ship. His binoculars were locked in a box. He took the key. Murdoch didn't have binoculars. Couldn't access them. System problem. Not that that was the only thing that led to the... When you get to the root causes, which is the first step, you have developed a hypothesis. I believe, an educated guess based on what you know, the evidence you have, I think this is the issue, or these are the issues. But we can't leave it there. We have to have data to back that up. Let me give you an example. I gave you the example over here. I was working with a district and they said transportation's an issue, or attendance is an issue. And I said, well, what do you determine? Well, we determined it was because they changed the bus schedule. And the buses were all over the place. All right. I said, what data shows that that led to attendance? Do you know how many kids were on the buses that, well, no. So, okay, were there any other issues? Well, our school board does allow families to have 5 days as long as it's with a family for vacations. That's in board policy. Okay, anything else? Well, some of the schools aren't enforcing the attendance policy. Do you have evidence on those? And when they dug deeper, long story short, when they dug deeper, they found that the bus schedule really had nothing to do with the attendance problem. They left it at the hypothesis level and didn't dig into the data to validate that hypothesis. And if you don't see the right part of the iceberg, you're still going to hit it. It's still there. So it is critical that we not only come up with, and it's critical that we come up with the root causes. We identify, we hypothesize about why. But we have to validate that with data. And let me go back to data. As a team, as a leadership team, at the building level or at the corporation level, and let me say something about corporations. We have to make sure that schools and corporations are focused on, have the same focus. Nothing against the corporation, nothing against the school. We want to do this, that's great. Hey, we're going to do this, that's great. Let's try this, let's try that. And you know what I'm talking about. And pretty soon we have initiatives, we have programs that we're using. And they're getting in the way of getting us to that vision of where we want to be. We have the commitment, but it's hard to have that commitment when the obstacles are still there, the gaps. So we have to, again, take an honest assessment, a good look in the mirror about where are those issues, where are we now, where are we committed to be, that vision. And as a leadership team, you are keepers of the vision. Keepers of the vision. And it's on us. Let's look at the if-then, just to give you a tool. We begin with a hypothesis. Teachers are not using differentiated instructional strategies. You can see that. The prediction is, which is our hypothesis, which is what we say is the root cause, is here the hypothesis. Then we say, based on that, from our data, based on our hypothesis, if these were implemented with fidelity, then more students with disabilities would become proficient. Now, that's where I say, show me the numbers. Show me the money. Show me the data. And then we have to ask ourselves, are they implementing these with a lower fidelity than expected? We have to come up with assessment questions that really make sure we verify this. What's the fidelity? Strategies observed? Is there a correlation between ELA proficiency and fidelity and differentiation? So we have to do a little gut check there. Again, we cannot stop with the hypothesis. We have to verify that, even asking questions about the depth of what we're doing. And I'm going to end quickly because I know that you're, and actually I'm going to turn it back over to Angie. Let me say this. We have PD. I heard PD mentioned over here. Professional development. We have professional development next week on using our new student management system. It's not PD. That's training. Training is operational. Training is what we do so our jobs run efficiently. Professional development is job embedded, career necessary to be better at what we do at a fundamental level. PD is differentiation. It's job embedded, it's ongoing, it's systematic. You have coaching with that, and it's measured to see, here's where I was with differentiation, here's where I am now, look at the strategies I'm using. That's PD. So when we have more programs that we're changing, we have more training. And if we have more training, we're taking away time for professional development. Again, going back to doing a resource analysis, exactly what are we using and why, and is it needed? That could be your iceberg. I'm saying, amen, a lot of icebergs. All right.
So as John was saying, that our hypotheses are those root causes, and it's important for us to differentiate between the root causes that we can actually take action on and ones that we can't. So as we start to dissect everything and think, you know, what are those root causes that you've kind of boiled it down to, is it worth our time, or is this something that we can't even make a dent on because we don't have that control? And what is really aligned to our work and what we do? What's aligned to the other priorities that we have in the school as well? So go back to your Menti, and I think this is the last thing in the Menti. What I want you to do is look at those different potential root causes and rate, to whatever degree you think is appropriate, how actionable are they? So it's on a continuum scale. So policies and procedures, can we change those? Can you have any impact on those? You said 3.3, right? Sometimes policies and procedures, we can make an impact, but they can't happen until they've gone through the proper channels and through the board, or, you know, been approved by your union, or, you know, there's so many steps. So it's not that none of these are a 5 or a 1 or, you know, anything in between. There's always going to be some situations that lend themselves to easy fixes, lots of action, and other times where we may not have any control over the situation. Transiency, we got kids moving in and out. Can we have control over that? In many cases, no, but you see it's still a 2.3. Because if we make our school the school that everyone wants to stay at, that may have an effect on transiency. There could be something to that. Inconsistent leadership, inconsistent staff. Again, we can't control when somebody moves, leaves, quits, dies, retires. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why people may leave. However, if we make our school a school that someone wants to stay at, that can have an effect on how long somebody stays within a school corporation. Low rates of inclusion, I see that's a pretty high one, and I love seeing that because we can have some impact there, absolutely. You wouldn't be here if you didn't believe that. Demographic composition of student enrollment. Not a whole lot of things. I mean, we take who we take. We take whoever walks in the door. It doesn't matter who it is. And we work with that population and embrace the strengths that they bring and the diversity that they bring to the table. Students coming in without the necessary skills. Why would that be a 2?
Outside resources.
Right? So, no, we can't, when somebody walks in, they walk in at a certain level, prepped or not prepped. But we can reach out to preschools. We can provide support to parents for preparation. We can offer some other programs, beef up our gen ed and special ed preschool programs. All of those kinds of things can have an impact. Lack of parental involvement. Now that's kind of an interesting one too. You know, I had a district that they're like, man, we don't have hardly any parental involvement. We set up things, they don't come. And so what's the number one thing that people usually think of to increase parent involvement? Food, exactly, right? If we feed them, they will come. They still didn't come. Go where they are. They started attending more. When we held them in their neighborhood centers, when we held meetings at different places, because if you didn't enjoy school or have a good school experience, you may not want to ever go back to school if you don't have to, which sometimes just means walking in the building. In this particular school that was working on this issue, they had an extremely high EL population, mostly Spanish speaking. And so they started bringing more interpreters into that environment that they were having different activities to try and make parents feel as comfortable as possible and to really be a part of things rather than just be attending, be a body there. Lack of money, technology, and our physical resources, well, sometimes we have control over that too. I mean, we think, well, the pot of money is the pot of money. And then I'll have a teacher say, well, I went out and I wrote a grant and I got this for my classroom because it was needed. You know, there are some things that we actually can have some degree of impact on. But what I'd invite you to do as you start doing this planning back in your schools and your districts, that you really look at those root causes and think, what is worth our time and effort? What is going to give us the payoff because it's actionable? This is another tool. The RIOT. So Marcy mentioned this morning the ISIL and the RIOT. The ISIL looking at the instruction, curriculum, and environment prior to looking at the L, which is the learner, for what we're going to work on. And the RIOT is looking at different ways to dig down into that root cause. So the R is review of records. Let's dig into the data that we have, the documents, the anything that's available to us. Sometimes we need to focus on the I, going in and interviewing people, having focus groups, talking with parents, talking with teachers, getting input from a variety of people, not just the people on the team sitting at the table, but digging deeper than that. Sometimes you find some really interesting things that nobody was thinking about. The O is observe, so going in and checking some things, gathering some data in that way. Looking at, is that fidelity even low? If we think fidelity is the issue, but the fidelity is pretty darn good, fidelity is not the issue causing the problem. And then test or experiment. So again, to validate a hypothesis, you sometimes have to test it out. if I do increase this, does it give us the payoff we're looking for before on a wide scale trying to implement something? So as we look at these different options, some are easier than others to do, but they tend to, the harder they are, they tend to be more reliable. So the more that you put into it, the more that you can really count on that data, rather than it being just a little bit lighter in the data. So, you know, like anything else, you have to think about how much effort do you want to put in, what kind of payoff are you looking for from this activity to try and get the right information. Now this is where I thought we were. So these are the different tools that are on the Padlet helping you to understand how to really get into that problem analysis piece and how to dig for those root causes. So you can check all of these different things to help you through this process. Within the success gap information, they also talk about elements that are essential for instructing students. And part of this is the database decision making. So we have to be able to use that to make decisions, to know how to instruct, what kind of tools to use. And we do part of this naturally as good educators. Is we're not just saying this is the curriculum, this is the process, I've done this for 20 years, I'm going to follow these steps. We gather data and we make changes and make decisions based on that data. And our kids are never the same. The kids I had last year are not the same as the kids that I have this year. So I have to make changes. And part of that is around cultural responsiveness. Again, every new batch of kids you get, you got to know about them. You got to get into what are they into, what are their backgrounds, what are they bringing already into the classroom, good or bad, right? And how can I change what I do and match it up with what they truly need and what's going to best communicate the content, build the relationship, all of those things that we know are important. We have to have a solid Tier 1. I mean, I think we've said this already multiple times today, that Tier 1 is critically important to have that core instructional program. We're gathering data along the way. We're using good stuff. We're using things that are proven, they're evidence-based, and there are lots of different websites that can bring you to, this has got solid background, this not so much. And we don't want to be using those not so much kind of programs and practices if we don't think they're having good effects. We have to have good leadership that is constantly helping us to improve, using a continuous process of looking at our data, making good decisions, and always trying to get better. There's never a finish line in education. I mean, we never hit the point to where we say we are the best we're ever going to be and we're done. Because then the bodies change, the kids change, the expectations change. So we're constantly evolving. And then also making sure that we connect this back with our true stakeholders, which are parents and families and kids. Prioritizing is incredibly important. Making sure that we don't take on everything under the sun. We have to think about good priorities. So I'll just kind of let you read these rather than read them to you. There's one quote that I have no idea who it came from, but I've heard it over and over, and that's that we have time for what we make time for. And that's all about prioritizing. We will find the time to do the things that we are committed to, that we feel like are really important. There is, when we look at, we've got lots of things. We've got lots of icebergs, right? We've got lots of root causes, but what are we going to focus on? We have a priority setting tool that's on the Padlet that you can look at as well. And some of the things that we have to think about are, number one, where are we with this process? Because sometimes we have things that we have already kind of put some of the things in place. We're underway with this process because maybe it fits within something else that we're working on within the district. How urgent is the need? Is this something that we have got to get on right away? Or is this something that's a down the road kind of, it's a long-term goal, but nobody's dying, right? I mean, you have to weigh those things out. What kind of resources do we have to make these things happen? Is it low-hanging fruit? Is it something that's going to be easy, or is it something that it's going to take a whole change, I mean, a major shift and lots of effort and lots of resources to make it happen? And are there any risks with following this lead? Okay, so we have to look at that. So you can kind of see in this tool that you can rate based on these different qualities. You can rate these things and help to sort out what you might want to focus on. So it ultimately will change color and give you a priority rating for that particular thing. That doesn't mean that just because something shows up as a high priority, that is what we as a team say, oh, well, book says red, we're got to do that one, right? It just is another source of information and a decision-making tool that we can use. So you can check that one out as well. Again, all of these things will remain on the Padlet. Has anybody seen this graphic before? If you've ever been to any of our MTSS trainings, we use this graphic within that as well. And it really comes from implementation science. And I've seen multiple versions of this with slightly different language, but this is the one that we really like the best. And it's all about thinking, when we use implementation science, we are thinking about what is it that it's going to take to create real change. Not the kind of change that I come in and say, from now on, we are doing this. We're implementing this new program, and then after a few months of excitement or maybe anxiety or anything else, it dies out, right? It disappears. Because we have a lot of things in education that happen that way. It's like, this is the new bright shiny box that the salesman came in with. We're going to do this. Oh, great. And then it flops, right? We want long-lasting change. And in order to really get sustainable change, we've got to have all the elements in place across the top. We have to have a vision. We have to know what does this look like? Why are we doing it? What's the purpose of it? We have to have the skill sets. When Marcy was talking about collective teacher efficacy, I've got to have the skills. So when you've got that gen ed teacher that says, yeah, I would love to have those 2 kids in my class, but I've never had any training in working with kids with autism. So could you find a different class for them to go into, right? Because they don't feel confident, they don't feel like they have those skills. So we've got to know what we're doing in order to do it, right? We have to have incentives, and I do not mean the chocolate, and I do not mean the paycheck, right? What I'm talking about is the payoff. If we do this, going back to John's if-then statements, then we will see this. If we put this change in place, you should expect to see students increasing their performance in this area. That's the incentive. You also have to have the resources to do it. If I tell you you're going to do all these new things, but I don't give you enough time to do them, or I don't give you the materials you need, that's going to be stressful. And then you have to have a good action plan. If you don't have an action plan, then you may feel like you are kind of running on that treadmill of, we're doing a whole lot of work, but we don't seem to be getting anywhere. So you can see if one of these aspects is missing, you're going to get some sort of an outcome, whether it's confusion, anxiety, resistance, and so on. The problem is that we have a lot of systems that aren't just missing one area, right? We may go into something new that we're told to do. There's a lot of mandates that come without support. And when those mandates come in, maybe we're missing the vision, like we know we have to do it, but we don't know why. We have no idea what the payoff is, and I don't feel like I have the skill set to do it, but yet I still am expected to do it. I don't even know what that combination would be, because that's probably going to create me wanting to go work at Walmart, because this is just too much, right? So it's important that we pay attention to all of these pieces and parts, and how do we make these things happen? How do we deliberately, as we're trying to create this plan, make sure that everyone's got the same vision, that we build the skills that are needed, that we pay attention to making sure everyone knows the potential outcome of this, that we provide the resources needed, and that we give that really clear step-by-step action plan. Which leads us to plan development, okay? As we're talking about plan development, we want to make sure those things are built in. So the whole purpose is just making sure we've got enough detail to make sure we really get the job done. We have to have all the steps in place. We also have to make sure that the steps are things that we can actually do. If we can't realistically do them, they shouldn't be on the plan, or we may have to head a different route. So hopefully the outcome is we're going to have that detailed plan so that everyone knows what they're doing, and it's promoting both accountability, like somebody's name is attached to doing certain things, or at least someone's role, and fidelity of implementation. So not only am I doing it, I'm doing it right. I'm doing it the way that we intended as we developed that plan. Which means I've got to have enough detail in the plan so that I can look at it and actually know what to do. Because I think I've read a lot of plans that I'm like, okay, I'm on step 4, but I don't get it. I don't get what I'm supposed to be doing or what you expect of me at this point. So as we're thinking about equitable practices, equitable education for all students, regardless of what they bring to the table. And we really think about what an ideal place would look like. A school environment, a learning environment that is bringing everybody in. Then what would be different than what you have now? So sometimes that's a good place to start, is by thinking of, when I walk into my building, and I look around at what's happening in the different classrooms and see what the current reality is, if I could wave that magic wand and just make it the perfect place, what would it look like? And what is different between those two? We start setting goals that aren't necessarily, we would like everyone to be 100% proficient on, all tests that they take. Well, we're not looking at that. We're looking at incremental goals that are going to take us from where we are now to where we want to be. And the goals need to be constructed by the team as a whole. I think it's hard sometimes, and sometimes we bring this to you guys as well, the state has set this level that we're all shooting for. You weren't part of that, right? You didn't help construct that target. When we're looking at goals, we're looking at our own individual systems and what we think is something that we want to shoot for. So what's important within our team, our district, our area, that kind of thing. So what actions do we need in order to make that happen? And sometimes you kind of have to backwards plan this, right? Just like we do for a lot of things in our lives. If eventually we want this, what are the things that need to happen before that? Trying to make sure that we get enough detail in there to where it doesn't fall through, that nobody drops the ball. Thinking about, are there any things within our policies and procedures that need to change in order for this to happen? Sometimes that's the barrier. Sometimes that's the roadblock. What resources do we need in order to make these things happen? Who's going to be responsible, not only for putting things in place, but also for collecting data to show us that it's happening? And then what do you do when Eric here leaves? Eric was on the plan, he had 15 of the steps, they were all with his name attached, and he left. How do you make sure this doesn't fall apart just because he left? So we need that continuity and consistency. So again, think about all of the things that need to happen, who's going to be responsible, how much time is needed, and then what data is going to be collected by doing this task or to tell us about this task. The time frame that we need, and thinking about the order sometimes. Again, this needs to happen before I can do this. And then what are they connected to as far as our kind of year-end goals? How does this all connect together? So any of you who have had to do or been part of your school improvement plans, similar stuff, right? You're looking at the data, you're driving down to what you need to focus on, and then you're creating steps that help move us from point A to point B with enough detail to make it happen. These are not short things. So some more guiding questions. I know we've been looking all through the process at the guiding questions that just help reframe our thinking a little bit. Again, what are the actions that we need connected back to those prioritized, actionable root causes? So not in general, but focused on those actionable root causes that become the most focused for us. What supports will we put in place to help the people who are implementing this plan and to ensure the fidelity? Do we need checks? Do we need, monthly meetings to make sure that we're moving on track? Do we need a Google Doc that helps keep track of this stuff? What do we need? What actions do we need to be able to measure and evaluate the success of the plan? What data are we going to collect? And then the decision rules. This is a hard concept, I think. And you can apply decision rules to a lot of things that we do. Back to your MTSS meetings, back to making decisions about whether a student gets to be evaluated or whether they're not at the point of needing to be evaluated. Having clear decision rules promotes equity because it ensures that student A and student B that have very, very similar data both get this opportunity or don't if we're following decision rules about the data. So as you're developing those decision rules and really thinking in terms of logical decision rules, if we're looking at, we have to look at both at the data that is about the student's progress or the overall progress or whatever indicator that we're looking at, whatever metric that we're using, and then also about the fidelity of implementation, because that tells us something too. If we're putting something in place and it's showing us just a little bit of growth, but the implementation is terrible, that tells us something. That tells us a little bit more about what to do next, rather than we see no progress, but we're putting it in place with high fidelity. That tells us something different, right? So we're going to look at all of those things when we put those decision rules in place, because we have to know that if I'm making the decision or if you're making the decision, if we're following the same decision rules, we should come out with the same decision. So let's look at this example. So this is a situation where we might say, I don't know, this is a questionable response. We're not sure what to do. So we've got the performance level going up the up the left-hand, or the y-axis, sorry. My math skills are not helping me here. And then across the bottom, we're looking at the time, okay? So over time, we would expect to follow that yellow line. That would be the expected trajectory. And we are seeing a pretty parallel line to that, right? When we're looking at the data. What's the issue here? Are we seeing improvement? Well, the line's going up, right? That's usually our yes or no. Did the line go up? Did the line go down? Did the line stay the same? But what's the holdup here? Why would we not say this is fantastic? Let's just keep doing it. Say it. Right, the gap is the same, right? Yes, we're making progress, and that's kind of what we've seen over the years of student performance. When gen ed students go up, special ed students go up. When gen ed students go down, special ed students go down. But the gap has remained fairly consistent over the years. So we're just not making a dent in removing that barrier, whatever that barrier is for your district. Okay, what about this one? Right, so we could clearly say, based on this decision rule, that it's a positive response because the gap is closed. And if we extend that line, if we continue to follow the trend line, we have a point in time that we can identify we should be able to expect that we've hit the goal. Right? This would be an example of a poor response. Line's still going up. Gap's getting bigger based on what we would project as far as expected trajectory. I think this happens a lot of times when we are talking about students that have been referred, right, for some intervention. Is the question always comes up, well, are they making progress, right? We ask that question. The student is making progress, but as they make progress, the expectations are growing at a higher rate than the progress line, which means the problem's getting bigger and bigger. So it's not always just about did the line go up, did the line go down. It's about the other things. But having these decision rules, this is a poor response to intervention, and we can clearly say that because the gap is widening. So again, it's not about how much growth, except for when we compare it to the goal. All right. Implementation and evaluation. So again, we can have the most beautiful plan in the world, but if we don't do it, if we don't complete the actions, we're not going to see any impact from something that we didn't do. And the implementation and evaluation is kind of a combination because, yes, we're implementing, but we're evaluating the process of implementing as well as the outcome of implementation. So we start with the data. We've got to have that baseline. We've got to know where our current reality is. Oh goodness, what is the IEP term? Present levels, right? You'd think I would know that, but present levels of performance, this is where we are, okay? So we're starting there, and then we're looking for the impact based on where we've set our goals. Where do we want to be? And we can create a decision rules matrix. So you can create one of those, and I believe you have an example of that in the Padlet as well. So it'll make it consistent across your team or across whatever problem-solving effort that you have. And when we use that, then we figure out the next steps. It's not going well, what are we going to look at? Sometimes you have to dig a little bit back into problem analysis too, to say, okay, if we have a poor response, is the poor response because we didn't have the right problem, we didn't have the right root cause? Or is the poor response because of a root cause of this issue? So again, implementation fidelity, lack of commitment to the process. What exactly is going on that's keeping this from having the impact that we thought it would have? So here's just an example of a completed decision rule matrix. So again, we've got specific things that can happen if we have high fidelity or low fidelity, and whether or not we see good response, questionable response, or poor response. So we've got some identified potential things that we can do. This is not what yours is going to look like, though. If you complete this and you're using this tool, yours is obviously going to look different based on the iceberg that you started with and the root causes that you determined. And then again, what those actions are. So you're asking things like, is this working? Is the plan working? Are we implementing? Are we implementing with fidelity? If it's not, what can we do? What can we do to increase the fidelity? Because that's where I would always start. It's, you know, the old saying of don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's what they're talking about here. Don't just automatically say it's not working when it might work if we did it right and we did it with true fidelity. And then what steps do we need to do in order to continue to make this plan more effective and to work better? All right, so back to a little team talk, because I know you guys are getting tired, and this is, to me, this is very intense material. This is not a fun training, so we're trying our best to keep you engaged with this. I want you to talk to your team members. What are some of the key takeaways? Because you're not getting anything done here today, right? You're going to be taking this back and figuring out what the heck do we do now? Where do we start? Key takeaways, and what are some of the steps that you want to take in order to get the ball rolling in using this process? All right, I'm going to debrief this, wrap up today, but then for as long as you guys want to stay and process with your team, you are welcome to. Maybe you all rode together and you can talk all the way home, but give me a sense of a key takeaway. If you got anything out of today, what is one big concept that you feel like is important for your district? Eric.
Making sure that you have identified the right people to be part of your team.
Getting the right team, getting the right heads together, the right people. Communicating between teachers, buildings, district, making sure everybody knows what's happening. Even if I'm at a building, but my district is working on this, I want to know this stuff too. It's got to get down to the teacher level in order for us to really make good progress on whatever we're working toward. What else? Right? Is it this piece of the iceberg? Is it the piece under here that we couldn't see? Where are we going to put our focus? Prioritizing, determining those actionable root causes. John mentioned something to me during the break time too, that how important it is to make sure when we're looking at data that we are following cohort data sometimes too, and making sure that we're comparing apples to apples, right? Looking at how our students progress over the years, and are there trends that we can see across a group? Or if always the 5th grade to the 6th grade transition shows a big decrease in something. That helps you to figure out where is the piece of the iceberg that we need to be looking at sometimes. Step. Just go around and tell me one single thing that your district might want to do in the coming weeks, months.
Yeah, I think what we're going to do is kind of get with our data person and really correlate to our essential spirit and essential standards that we have identified? And then where do we need to go as far as in taking us through like those action steps, right? Like, and then doing all that problem solving, but I think as a district, we should move drill down into our own data.
Yep.
More specifically.
Absolutely, because data is meaningless until it's meaningful, right? And your own data is what really matters, not anything that we could tell you, but drilling down into your own data, looking at your population, looking at how that connects back with what your priority standards are and where the shifts need to occur and where the action needs to happen.
I would say that same thing. Another problem that we want to start looking at is where in the process is our MTSS breaking down, like our tier models and.
Yeah, how's MTSS going? Where's the breakdown? Where are we doing well with our MTSS framework, and maybe where are some of the issues that might be the if-then pieces that might be causing some of the barriers that we see or some of the success gaps? Did you guys think of anything?
Yeah, we're looking more at the feeding into our teachers with the HLPs, and then evaluating to their point the iceberg to attack first.
Yeah, so the high leverage practices, they seem like no-brainers, but unless we are deliberate with making sure they're in place all the time, they tend to fade. They go into the background. Yeah. What do you guys think? One action step.
Take this back to our teaching and learning department.
Okay, teaching and learning. We got to get this stuff to the right people, right?
I think reflecting on the implementation science piece, we have a couple things that we're rolling out and make sure we have all those things intact and reflect on that with our group.
So looking at those elements within implementation science that lead to sustainable change. Are we missing something? Okay. Forming a team. That is the first step for a lot of people. It really is. Good. What do you guys think?
I think just making sure that teachers understand the why behind what we're doing, and that shouldn't be because the district or the network said that we have to, but they need to know how it is going to impact both teaching and achievement for their
Yep. So that incentive piece of the implementation science, we've got to know our why, because our why drives what we do. Yeah, the 5 whys I think is a great tool. Yeah. I had somebody do that to me on the fly one time. I said, I was at a training and I wanted to be like a more advanced trainer on something. And the head trainer's like, why do you want to do that? I said, well, I think I'd be good at it. I started listing off my things and he's like, well, why do you think? And I'm like, I see what you're doing, right? But he did. He took me down to the real bottom line reason why I wanted to do something. And it's the same kind of concept, absolutely. All right, well, as we wrap up today, now that you have no more cells that can be firing away, I would ask you to do one more last task, and that is to scan the code on the left, do a quick evaluation. It's our standard evaluation, so you've all probably completed this same thing 100 times or more. Do know that the scan on the right is to the remaining trainings that we are offering between now and September 30th. Our grant actually ends September 30th, and we are in the process of coming up with what we're going to be focused on in the coming year. But we can't offer any trainings past September 30th until we get all that ironed out. So look for more details in the future. And we want to support you in whatever ways we can until September 30th. And again, the support after that is kind of unclear at this point. So I would encourage you, if you have follow-up questions, concerns, want some clarification, need some access to some different resources, contact us between now and the end of September so that we can make sure that we're the ones who can provide that to you.